Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast episode. I'm Kathy Mazak, your host for today. Today, I'm so excited to bring to you an interview with Barbi Honeycutt. This interview is just packed with goodness. There's so many nuggets of actionable information in here. You might want to get a pencil. Barbi Honeycutt is passionate about training professors to become better teachers. And in doing so, she founded a company called Lecture Breakers. Through her work with Lecture Breakers, she travels around and gives speaking engagements to universities and works with centers for teaching and learning. Because of the pandemic, she now has a whole bunch of online options. And the thing that I want to point your attention to today is her upcoming conference. If you like this podcast episode where you're going to get so many actionable tips and things you can run and go download that are going to help you be a better teacher in the classroom, you are going to want to go to Barbi's Lecture Breakers conference. The registration link is in the show notes. The conference is happening in June. It's an online conference. It's 3 days long. It's delivered live, super engaging, so many guest speakers. All her guest speakers this year are authors, and we are proud to be sponsors of the conference this year. So if you go, there's a whole bunch of freebies and things. You'll see my little face very active in the Lecture Breakers conference this year. In today's episode, Barbi actually takes an episode that I did earlier in this podcast feed, probably back in the first 20 episodes, called Time-Saving Teaching. And she pulls out 3 really important ideas and develops them and gives you all so many ideas for really effective and engaging, but also time-saving teaching. So I hope that you'll find that this episode helps you to corral your teaching. And, I hope this episode inspires you to try something new with your teaching. And I can't wait for you to hear Barbi and I kind of get into it about all the ways that you can be an amazing teacher in the classroom and save time. It doesn't have to take so much time so that, you have time to write and publish. So enjoy this conversation with Barbi Honeycutt. All right, I'm so excited because today I have my friend and colleague, Barbi Honeycutt from Lecture Breakers, here to talk to you all about time-saving teaching. So this is something that comes up for our audience all the time because there seems to almost be a competition between writing and teaching. And so, Barbi, would you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, Kathy, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's so great to be here and to be able to connect with your audience. So my name's Barbi, and I've been working in faculty development for the last 20 years. And part of that time was spent on a college campus doing, workshops and professional development at a teaching and learning center. And then I transitioned about 10 years ago to doing this work on my own terms with my own business. And so I've been helping faculty think about how to create effective and engaging learning experiences in their classrooms. And I realized that for many professors out there, there is, like you say, this competition, this struggle to try to be a productive scholar, but to also be an engaging educator, which is a nod to the show that you did when you came on my podcast a couple of weeks ago. So listeners, if you haven't heard that one, be sure to check that one out as well. And I hope this conversation today is an extension of that. But yeah, so I have a podcast, Lecture Breakers, where you can tell that you are breaking up your lectures and trying to create engaging learning experiences. I'll talk a little more about that as we go along.
Awesome. I'm so excited. This is like, Barbie and I met on the academic business interwebs a long time ago and are just more recently kind of starting to collaborate and see how our work kind of overlaps and enriches, each other's kind of focus. So Barbie, tell me, what can our audience do to be awesome teachers, but also to not let teaching just like flow over and take up every spare moment in their calendar?
Yeah, I love this question. And I went back and listened to your episode number 11, where you talked about when teaching takes over.
Yeah.
In that episode, you shared, I think it was like seven sort of recommendations that you had. And I thought what I would do is maybe take 3 of those and dig a little deeper into those, maybe share a few more strategies and tips and, just recommendations to not only save time, but also to save energy, right?
Yes.
Because, it takes so much to teach and it takes so much to write. So, yeah. So let's start. So one of them that you shared, which I resonated with immediately, was you said, especially during the time of the semester where everything is just kind of pulling at you, it's like you got to do grades, you still have to, teach, you're still trying to balance your research and maybe some service or advising. And so one of the things you mentioned was to do more participation or activities in class where you're kind of flipping that work or turning that work over to the students. And, there's a quote that I love from Dr. Terry Doyle, and I had him on my podcast, episode 112.
Okay.
And his quote was, "The one who does the work does the learning."
Oh.
And so, yeah, right. So
yeah.
Really think about that in your teaching. It's like, wait a minute, am I the one that's always preparing the slides and preparing the assignments and doing the work of the learning and then presenting that in a nice, pretty package, well organized for my students? So I'm challenging you to rethink that and say, wait a minute, where are those times when I can think about flipping that work or turning that work over to my students? And so I do have some recommendations around that, but I just, wanted to get your reaction to that quote.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. One, because that has been my experience, right? That actually, I don't know if anybody listening has had this experience where you've kind of like, maybe you underprepared unintentionally, right? Or like things got away from you and you ended up with the sticky note lesson plan, right? Just like,
right.
So it used to happen to me in like the last 3 weeks of the semester. I would like walk in with a sticky note, like, this is what I'm doing today. Because there was just like no other thing. And sometimes those were the best, but I almost felt like I had to be forced to do that in order to like really own it. Right. But this quote, that the person doing the work does the learning, kind of lets you just like lean in to not over preparing and not struggling to make each slide perfect. It's kind of like permission to share the learning experience instead of taking it all on yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. That reminds me of a story. I remember I was teaching workshops for graduate students and postdocs, and this was back when I was working on a campus. And I remember that we had this brand new building that was built and it was all fancy. And I was super excited to go there and teach this workshop. So this was a workshop that was on site and it was about, teaching and active learning. And I just remember, yay, I'm excited. I have all my materials prepared. I have my at that time, it was a little jump drive, little flash drive you plug into your computer. And I was like ready to go. I had everything organized. I had my worksheets, totally prepared. And so I walk into this classroom and I'd never been there before. And there's a lesson in that too, but I'd never been there before. And I walked in and I got ready to plug in everything. And there was no computer and there was no projector. There was no projector in the screen because this place was still under construction.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? And here come the postdocs, here come the TAs and the grad students, everybody's coming in and I'm welcoming them. And I'm like, if you will give me 10 minutes or 5 minutes, I think he even said, I need to redesign this workshop really quickly because I had no slides.
Wow.
So fortunately, I did have like worksheets and I had a whiteboard and I had brought my own markers, also a lesson learned from the past. I brought my own whiteboard markers. And so I threw together in my head, like, these are the activities we're going to do. And I still know my lecture, quote unquote lecture, but I'm not going to go through slides. This was the highest rated workshop that I had ever had.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, the comments on the feedback were actually things like, thank you for not doing so many slides. I see so many every day. It was nice to just be able to interact with my colleagues,
Nice.
So it was amazing. And so just in that moment, I'm not saying, don't do that at the last minute, but let go, right? Let go of some of that structure and control just a little bit, and see what happens.
Yeah. I think there's like the magic of the room, right? Like you get in the room with people and like, especially in a situation like that, where it's a workshop that people, come to maybe with a little bit more energy than the everyday teaching, right? But that they can really result in like that sparky kind of connection that humans can do when they're doing it well, right? That really can lead to so much better, more effective learning than being, lectured to, right?
Yeah. Well, and like I say, I'm not saying do that all the time. It was just, that was kind of an aha moment for me that it's like, wait a minute, I don't have to go in every time with all of everything just perfect and beautiful and packaged so well. And some other recommendations just to share, for some of your listeners, this might be a scary thing to walk in and think about, like turning over a piece of the class to your students where they are the ones who are actively involved in doing an activity or doing a case study or working together, because there's this sense of a loss of control. Like, when you have your PowerPoint slides in a particular order, what examples you're going to share, what stories you're going to share, what problems you're going to put on the board, the answers, and you probably know the answers students are going to have, right? So for some of your listeners, there might be some of that. It's not really resistance, but it's like a hesitance. Yeah. And so for those listeners, I'll say that, try to think of maybe just one moment in your lecture where you can have your students do something, even for 5 minutes. And it doesn't even have to be a group thing. It can be as simple as review your notes. Go back to what we've discussed the first part of this class and review your notes. And then as you get more comfortable, you can let go a little more and give them longer, deeper, more meaningful things to do, like a case study or things like that. But the more moving pieces in an activity, then the more you're going to have to prepare. So I want to maybe put that out there and say that you can't just go in and wing it, right? You want to make sure you're using something that you've done before, seen before, participated before. If you're new to this, like if you're just like, I'm not sure if I want to do this, because it is a very different way of teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. No. And that, I think that idea of like the hesitancy, like I'm sure resonates with people. And also that kind of leads me to a little sub question about prep. And I don't know if it fits here or maybe it fits later in the 3 things that you're going to focus on, but there's, I think, also a belief that if I want to do active learning, if I want to flip the classroom, if I want to do whatever, not just traditional, I'm going to lecture from slides, then it's going to take more prep. And I'm scared because I already feel like I prep a lot. So could you address that kind of the fear that this unknown thing is going to just explode into actually more work for me?
Love this question. And I get this question a lot. So I want you to think about how much time it takes you to prepare a lecture. Right. So you're doing the research, you're making sure it's up to date, you're citing your sources, you're going through and finding images, you're looking for maybe a relevant news article that connects to what you're doing. So you can, make that connect to your students and bring something meaningful, authentic, and current into the classroom. You're doing a lot of work. It's a lot of prep. Yeah. But your prep is content-based, right? So you're planning your questions, you're planning, what you're going to say, you're planning, all those things. When you do active learning, your prep is not the content necessarily, it's the structure. of the activity.
Mm-hmm.
So your research becomes, okay, wait a minute, what's the best way to divide my students into groups? And then how am I going to present this? Do I need a worksheet to go with it? Like you're planning the structure. Should I do a slide that also explains the instructions? Is there going to be a worksheet they fill in as they go along? Are there manipulatives, like things physically that they're touching and working with, like in a lab environment? So your prep time changes, like the prep itself changes. It's not just like the content. You know the content.
Yeah.
You probably are the expert in the content at this stage in your career. So now it's about, you become not an event planner, but you're like the structure planner, right? You're like, okay, here I have 30 students. This is how many I have. Here's how we're going to break into groups. Or if you're teaching online, you're like, okay, how many breakout rooms do I have? Is that what I want to do? How am I going to manage the chat? It becomes a logistics question more so. And you do have to plan your active learning strategies and your activities. You have to have a plan, because this is where students resist. So student resistance is a very real thing. And I also call it student hesitance, because maybe they've had a prior experience that was really negative and they're going to bring that to your classroom. It's like, oh, we're doing group work. Well, if you are structured in the way you're presenting it, you know how your outcomes connect to the activity, your students understand the purpose of it and the value, then you don't have to spend as much time getting that buy-in, right? You're really focused on, here's what we're doing today. So yes, there is still time and there's prep that's involved, but it's not the same type of prep as putting together a well-designed like presentation.
Yeah. And I can see that kind of prep is more leveraged in a way, because like once you figure out how to manage a class that's doing group work in whatever way, you figured that out. So it's different than like, okay, I was teaching biology 101 and now I'm teaching biology 305, and so the content, I need to like go and review the content, but it's really like, the content, this work then becomes like how you create the container, right? For the learning to happen in. And that seems like something that you can use no matter what the content is.
Exactly. And, one of the recommendations you shared was in your episode 11 was don't reinvent the wheel. Yeah. So this totally applies there. Like, what have you seen or done in your classes before? Like a think, compare, share. Most of us have all heard about that, where we ask a question to our students, they think about it, they work with a partner and they talk about it, and then we share it as a group. That is a tried and true piece of advice. You don't have to reinvent that. Like, let's just do that, and there's a million of those activities out there that people can use. And even if it is a 10-minute activity or a moment of reflection or a moment of writing or a moment of thinking, that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about active learning. Like, you're just breaking up that lecture, that constant need for you to talk at your students and to be prepared, as it's got to flow perfectly. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is you're allowing that space for students to do that messy work of learning and connecting and thinking with you. And you're really their guide, right? So, we've all heard that sage on the stage, guide on the side thing. You're moving from that lecturer on the podium to being that coach or that guide or facilitator. And like I say, that does take a different set of skills. It's a different way of teaching, but it can be so valuable and enriching, not only for you, but also for your students. And there's just something in that where it's like your authentic self can show up and you can say, wow, I really do know this stuff. I didn't have to prepare 50 slides,
Yes. I love that.
So just to give like a specific activity, because I know my listeners love this, so I'm sure your listeners do too, because they're all in academic positions. But one activity that could work really well, like if you're just needing a few more minutes to kind of catch your breath or just to kind of get your thoughts together, is to do what I call a focusing activity right at the beginning of class. So there's a lot of ways you can do this. So it could be that you have a screen up on the board. It's got a slide on it that has like a provocative question or a controversial question or a graph with a piece of data or evidence or something on it. And you ask your students in the first 5 to 10 minutes to just respond to that, like talk with each other or write something down. Like, what do they think it means? Or how is it relevant to last night's homework or to the video? And you get them working together, and you're not up there like having to start class. Class will just start with that. And what it does, I call it a focusing activity because it focuses their attention on the content. It gets them started in class, like it gets things warmed up. It gets them to let go of some of their resistance or hesitance to be active. It's like, let's do this thing. And then you can take a moment jot down a few more notes on your sticky note if you need to, or walk around, have a conversation with students, hear what they're saying. So then there's this natural start to class that's like you're meeting them where they are. And there's so many ways to do a focusing activity. And I have a few of those that I share on my blog, but just maybe rethink how you start your first 5 or 10 minutes of class, because that really sets the tone for the rest of the class.
Yeah. And the other thing it does, I think, is it immediately positions the students as having some kind of thoughts instead of where and especially if the focusing activity is not one that there's like a clear right or wrong answer, but rather where they can engage. And then it sets them up as having something to say, where I think a lot of times we try to go from lecture to like, now we're going to have discussion questions, but the idea of you standing in the front of the room and depositing knowledge into their brains conditions the students to not think they have the authority to discuss things, Right. So this kind of activity would set that tone of like, they have something to say. There's not like a right or wrong answer that you're looking for.
Yeah. And you could bring one of your research questions to this or something that you're struggling with or anything like that allows it to connect to and align with other work that you're doing, whether that's in the community or on the campus or within your own research or your lab. And I mean, if it's authentic, it's meaningful, it's valuable. It's not like an exercise and just like homework, right? It's actually something that matters. And man, your students will jump right on that. I mean, they'll be so excited and curious about it. And one more thing I was going to say too about sort of managing your energy, because I do want to pay attention to that. There's manage time, there's manage your energy. Yeah. I've used this in faculty development workshops. And let's say you're teaching on site. So back to in person and your students might be working in groups and maybe they're solving a problem or working through something that you have them working on in the classroom. You can give each of your groups, like I've used cups in the past, a red cup, a yellow cup, and a green cup. But I've also used just pieces of paper that kind of stand up, like you make a little table tent card of each of those 3 colors. And you ask your students, all right, look, if your group is working through the problem and you feel like you're making progress and you're moving along, keep your green cup or green table tent up on your table so I can see it. And then if you're kind of like, okay, we might need some of your help, but we're doing okay. We're not stopped with our activity. We're going to put a yellow there. So come by when you can. And then if it's red, it's like, whoa, we cannot even move forward until you come and help us. Yeah. And this little activity, like it's not really an activity. It's more like a classroom management thing, but it will help you focus your attention on the students who need it the most. And then if you start seeing a lot of red cards popping up, it's like, okay, pause this activity. It's time for me to do a thing. So this is another way to kind of manage if you're feeling kind of stressed out about going from group to group or who should I talk to, or maybe you didn't get to everybody. This is a way to kind of control that and not feel so out of control or chaotic.
Nice. I love
Not
that.
really a teaching strategy, but just kind of a classroom management thing. So.
Sure. Totally a group management strategy. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Wonderful. I love it. So many good gems. I hope you get your pencil out.
Right. So these are just little bite-sized recommendations. Yeah. So let's move to another one that you said that resonated with me was to use like templates.
Yeah.
And I loved this because I love a good template for planning anything. And I would include a process. Like if there's a process you repeat over and over again, you just kind of start to streamline it. As podcasters, we have a process for how we record and edit and, publish things. And I use that same process every time. So the same thing can go, for your class. So, we talk about a template. I actually have a lesson planning template. We can put it in the show notes or people, you can
awesome.
get it. You can get it at barbihoneycutt.com/plan. So this is like a 4-step lesson planning process, and it actually uses the acronym PLAN. And you can use it for any class, any lesson, any lab. Doesn't matter if it's online, doesn't matter. And so the P stands for prior knowledge. Like what can you do to tap into students' prior knowledge right at the beginning of class? And that's kind of related to that focusing activity too, a little bit. You're kind of leaning on like, what have we already done in class? And then you're activating prior knowledge, which is like a retrieval practice, which is a very important piece of learning. And then the L is your learning activity. So like, what are you going to do in class? Is it a case study? Are you working in groups? Are students taking notes? And what's happening in that space? Then the A is assessment. So how are you going to know if your students got it? What kind of check-in can you do? And it can be a very small check-in. And then finally, the N is next step. Like, how does this lesson connect to the next one? And so just by having that framework and kind of plugging in your process and your content, it'll help you kind of shape it. And you can repeat that over and over and over again for all of your lectures. And of course, you can adapt and change it as you need to, but just having a system or a process can alleviate a lot of the prep time and planning and like, oh, what am I going to do? Feelings.
Yes. I mean, first of all, I love a good acronym. So good.
Right.
An acronym that means something and so good. But also it's the same as like when you're sitting down to write something, if you can start with a structure instead of starting with a blank slate every time, again, it helps you manage your energy. Because every time you sit down and you have to recreate the structure from scratch, you're using your decision-making energy that is better used to figure out what the L is going to be in the plan, template, so I love that.
Excellent. So yes, I totally agree. And then another just sort of classroom management, time management tip is to, and your audience may already do this, but is to batch record videos. But when you record your video, like think about, first of all, what content can go into a video. So now, of course, with COVID, everything has shifted and we have all kinds of models of high flex classrooms, flipped classrooms, blended, hybrid, like we've come out with all these new models. So if you're using video in any way in your course, then I encourage you when you sit down to record it, just focus on the content. Make a video that focuses on content. Make it evergreen. Don't put anything in it that's related to the dates or the semester or the students or the examples that you only used in this particular class. Like make it something that you can create kind of a library of videos that you can then reuse over and over each semester. Then if you can put, a little 1-minute intro video above that, in your learning management system that says, welcome to, the spring 2022 cohort or whatever, you can put all that context in a small video, but your content should live in its own little space. And that way you can reuse it over and over again. And I think not a lot of us think that way because we're always talking to the current students we have. And we want to make sure that they're the ones we're speaking to. But when it's content that doesn't change, those things are worth videos, and just try not to make them contextual. And they also don't have to be fancy. So you can definitely strip out all of your fancy lights and all those things and just talk to your students, So I just want to take some of the pressure off of that, because your videos, if you can just really create that library of resources, and then there, it's there for your students, but it's really for you as you're creating lessons, it can really help save time and energy too.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more evergreen kinds of things that we can create, the better. Of course, I love like the idea of thinking about the content as being evergreen, and then how you present it changing and how long you take, right, to like really work to help students, digest that content will change according to the people in the room, but the digital room or physical room, but the content itself, creating with an eye towards being lasting.
Yes. And also, consider audio lessons. So this is a new space, and I've been kind of connecting with people out in the Lecture Breakers group about, how we create audio lessons, what those look like, because like I love podcasts. I listen to at least one podcast every single day while I'm doing dishes or laundry or whatever. And it's my professional development. I listen to a lot of different types. And so your students are probably doing something similar. So sometimes it might be okay for you, like while you're recording that video of the content that you're going to make evergreen, go ahead and strip out the audio and just make it an audio lesson as well. And then your students have two different ways to interact with, consume, get that information. And so it also kind of falls under UDL principles, the Universal Design for Learning, where students can learn in lots of different ways. And so if you have the slides as well as you talking over those slides, and you also have just an audio clip or version of your lecture, that can be really helpful for students as well. So, just kind of think about getting more mileage out of one recording. You don't just have to redo these videos or lessons every single semester.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm also like a super podcast lover. So I love consuming audio. And if anything that's going to take that, like make it easier for your students, like if they can listen when they're in their car or when they're, doing something else, they're jogging or walking or whatever, give them the opportunity to do that. It's just a more, equitable, I think, thing to do.
Yeah. And I've talked with more professors now who are starting to integrate existing podcast episodes into their courses. So, you don't have to create everything yourself. If you find an amazing podcast episode, it's like, hey, listen to this and make that, their activity or their lecture for that particular, unit. And that can be really powerful too. And it takes the pressure off of you to have to create, but also, it gives your students a different perspective. And I've also had a couple of podcast guests on my show who've created podcasts with their students, which is a pretty cool activity as well.
Yes, absolutely. One of my, she's been on Angel Carr, who's one of our original Amplify members, created a podcast with her students. They produced it, they edited it, they did all the content. It was a neuroscience podcast, and it's like so engaging for them and such skill building. And now she has this podcast that she can use like forever, as she teaches neuroscience concepts.
Yeah. And students learning from other students, so powerful, right? Yep. I mean, it's just amazing. And I just love that. If that's something that you want to put into your course, of course, students are going to learn a lot more transferable skills in that experience that might not directly relate to biology or neuroscience, but the process of creating something is just so invaluable. And that actually leads me to the last thing I was going to talk about, because you mentioned like the last thing in your episode was about assessment. And you were like, how can you use assessments in the moment so that you're not like taking home a whole bunch of papers or having to look through all this data? And this is for real. Like the biggest question is about grading and assessment that I get all the time. And, I just want to say this. I want to leave you with a quote here. That's like, I want you to recognize that active learning is actually assessment in action. Because when students are working together and they are doing something together, they're producing something, creating something, solving something, and you're there with them, you can see it. Do they get it? Where are they getting caught up? Where are they getting confused? And right in that moment, you can correct them or guide them, and you don't have to look at any paperwork, right? You're not grading anything. It happens in your classroom. And so when you can do that with your students, that can be an amazing experience for all of you. And again, you're going to leave that classroom not with any more work to grade, but your students are going to leave with the feedback from you right then, So there's so many different ways you can put your students to work in the classroom. I have I had a colleague, Carlos. He came on the show. I think it was episode 82. I think so. We can link it in the show notes. And he talked about how he got rid of all of what he calls throwaway assignments, like assignments that are just done just to be done. Right. And he then worked with his library to create an open access website, which became a resource that his students curated and created and put out to the public to talk about whatever his topic was, which is in science. He's a very prolific science educator and scholar. And so his students, when it was time to create this and pull together the resources, they realized the stakes were a little higher, because now this is not just for writing for, Dr. Honeycutt. This is writing for the public. And their work was so much better. So, I just encourage you, if that's something that just really excites you and you're like, wow, can we get rid of these tiny assignments that students only show me and really put forth work that the public can see? Like say you're studying climate change. Well, like here's the current research that we've studied. Or say you're studying something like, maybe you're creating a course where it's like career development and it's like how to write resumes, right? So like your students could put together a website of the best resume tips and examples and videos of interviews and things like that. And so it becomes bigger than the course. So like I say, any kind, like rethink your assessment. It doesn't have to be these tiny little quizzes all the time that you got to take home and look back over, that you can really make something that's impactful and meaningful beyond the scope of the course.
Yes. I mean, even the tip you gave about the red, yellow, green cup, right, is assessment. Like they're on the train or they're off, right? Or they're kind of on. And you can address it in the moment. And I think there's an underlying problem, which is understandable because of how many of us went to school and how it's difficult to break some of these, kind of beliefs that you watched somebody impart on you for so many years. But like, there's this, belief like assessment is for grading, assessment is for, and if you shift that to assessment is for learning, making sure you're assessing them because you need to know that they have an understanding of the material enough to say you have passed this class, or to say like, now you can go on to the next thing. So it's a really different way of thinking about assessment. And it's a way that rarely, I hope that things are getting better, but I remember like our I went to a great master's program. It's a TESOL master's program where teaching's in the title of the thing. And we had a 1-credit course about assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, no, that's not, it needs to be kind of integrated into everything we do. We need to stop thinking about assessment equals test or assessment equals quiz.
Yeah. And assessment and grading are 2 different things.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know that. There's 2 forms of assessment. There's formative assessment, which is what I'm talking about here, where you're getting that feedback from your students in the moment, during the process, before the stakes are high. You are there, to guide them and give them the resources that they need. And then there's summative assessment, which that's your grading, right? And everybody tends to equate that with assessment, and that's not the case. Right. Of course, we have to grade, although there's a whole movement now happening in higher ed with ungrading. But yeah, there has to be something right now, and given the climate that we're in and the culture that higher ed is in, where there's this pressure to have grades. And I'm not saying that we eliminate those, or if those of you who are ungrading champions, great, let's jump on that board. I love what's happening in that space, and I have so much to learn. But the whole idea here is reframing what we mean about, I love what you said about assessment as learning. That should be the goal. Yeah. And that's something that is going to be a huge shift, I think, in higher ed in the next few years, as I see more and more colleagues kind of breaking out and saying, wait a minute, what are we trying to do here? And really questioning why it is that we've done things the way we always have. So there's a lot happening, I think, in the assessment space.
Yeah, I think so too. That's really exciting. Okay. So will you just tell us your 3 tips again? So we got a review. And then I want to talk about your upcoming Lecture Breakers conference. So tell us the 3 tips again.
The 3 tips, and like they say, they came straight from, responding to your episode 11. So it is, try to integrate activities in class when appropriate. And they don't have to be big activities. They can be small. Mm-hmm. And, make sure that you have the idea of kind of a structure in place for what that activity is going to look like. The second one is to use some kind of template or process. So any kind of lesson planning framework or a template for your videos or process for producing those. And then the last one is to really think about active learning as your assessment in action. What kind of assessments are you doing with your students? Anytime your students create something together, that is assessment. You're going to watch them create it. They're going to produce something. And I have so many activities on my blog about this and how you can easily do that. So I encourage you to take a look at my blog if you are looking for more ideas.
Awesome. So I feel like you've really given us so many things to think about and so many kind of tips that we can explore. And I know your blog is an amazing resource. I want to make sure that everybody listening knows about your yearly Lecture Breakers conference. So tell us about the conference and the dates and how they can attend.
Yes. So thank you so much. The Lecture Breakers Virtual Summer Conference is coming up this year. It's June 7th through 9th, 2022. So it's 3 days and it's live, interactive, webinar type formats, but my speakers are extremely engaging. So you're going to get ready to chat. And so each day has 3 speakers and there's 30-minute breaks in between. So we can kind of process what we're doing. And the other cool thing here is that all of it is recorded and available to you for 30 days. So if you can't attend the live sessions, you can come in at any time and watch those videos. And the other piece that I've added to the conference, I started the conference this way and it's become extremely popular, is our community space. So I run a community right along with the conference so you can chat and connect with the sponsors, the speakers, and other participants. And it's just a great way to stay connected and dive into more resources and kind of reflect. You can also earn a digital badge. So you go through the conference, you complete these 3 questions that we have for you, and you can earn a digital badge to show off on social media or wherever. So this year I've added a bonus session for me that I'm facilitating, and it's just pre-recorded so you can watch it anytime. And it's all about that student resistance or hesitance in the classroom. Like, how do I get my students to actually participate in these activities that I've planned? So that's kind of how it's structured. And you can learn more at lecturebreakersconference.com. And Kathy, you are a platinum sponsor this year. So I want to give a shout. I want to give a shout out to you. You're doing a webinar. Yes. And so do you want to talk about that for a moment? Because I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. So this is one of the ways that we've figured out to collaborate with each other, which has been just, I'll speak for both of us. It's been really fruitful for both of us. So as a sponsor, we get featured, in emails leading up to the conference, but also I'll be doing, as part of the conference, I'll have a 15-minute kind of mini webinar, quick win type video that will be in the member space and that you can watch. it's going to be called like 3 calendar shifts for making time to write, even when you have a heavy teaching load. So you'll get access to that if you come to the Lecture Breakers conference. And then also after in late June, on June 29th, I'll be doing a special webinar for the Lecture Breakers audience that is all about like making time to publish even when you have a heavy teaching load. So I'm excited to create this kind of content that takes into consideration that we want to be great teachers. And I want to say, because sometimes I might come off like I want you to like put your teaching in a corner, but I don't at all. Like what I want though is for your teaching and your research and your service to like all feel like they're about the same thing. And to really, for you as the professor to be in control of how you are like moving your career forward. And for people who have heavy teaching loads, who I was always one of them, like my load was 4-4 when I was at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. A lot of the things I teach in my programs about making time to write come from that place of like 4-4 teaching load. How am I going to get this done? Because I want to be a world-class researcher. And I also want to do right by my students and all of that. So hopefully if you come to the Lecture Breakers conference and if you get on Barbie's list, then you can come to that webinar as well. That'll be coming up on June 29th.
Yes, I'm so excited to work with you on this. I love how we're both looking at the different roles that professors have and then like meeting in the middle. Like we talk about research, we talk about teaching, we know it's there. And now we're going to kind of like combine those to make sure we have what is a productive scholar, right? A productive educator. So, I wanted to give a shout out to the Lecture Breakers weekly sort of newsletter. I share a free teaching strategy every month. And this past week we featured you, Kathy, and your business about, everything that you're doing. And so for those of you who are looking for like a free teaching strategy, every week, you can sign up at barbihoneycutt.com/weekly, or just go to my website. It's all over there. So you can sign up for that.
Yay. So many great resources. And I will just say too, for like the Lecture Breakers conference, like go check it out. Consider if you want to go. And if you like what you see, like bring some friends. Yeah. Because Barbie usually does her workshops to campuses. So she is well versed in like, let's bring, 5 or 10 people from your campus, to this conference. Getting that buy-in from your school, I think is really important because they benefit as well as you. You're going to benefit from going to the conference because you're going to leave with more inspiration around your teaching and really ideas of what to do and how to shift away from lecturing or shift away from traditional kind of the way maybe that you were taught and implement new ideas with engaging speakers. So it's that I love conferences for like that energy that they give. And I also like really appreciate, I think in the world of online conferences and summits, a lot of people are doing pre-recorded things and this is not pre-recorded. So you get recordings for 30 days, but it's not, you get to engage with the speakers.
Absolutely. And I have amazing speakers lined up. I swung for the fences with these speakers. I tried to get everyone who's coming out with a new book or in the past 12 months or has one coming soon. And then I will be doing a raffle every day to give away books that everyone's writing, including Kathy, your book that's coming out. And so there's just it's just a lot of fun. We have a great time. And I will say that the chat is on fire. Like I can never keep up with the chat because everyone is so engaged. And each of the speakers makes a real effort to make it not a sage on the stage type of thing. There's a lot of interaction. So you can really kind of see how others are making engaging spaces. And then you can see that as kind of a model to then replicate in your own classes, which is always really cool. And I love to learn. I take the job of host of this conference, but I learned so much through the process. So so I invite everybody to check it out. I do have special rates for groups and campuses. So just take a look at the website and reach out if you have any questions. Love to have you as part of the Lecture Breakers community.
Awesome. We're going to link up all the things in the show notes. And Barbie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. It is just so great to talk with you. And I love the work that you're doing and how you're supporting scholars. And I love that we now are really thinking about like productive scholars and engaging educators and what that means. And it's just a joy and a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, same. Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.